Hey, welcome to the Glen Gauer podcast, the best podcast you'll listen to all day. Sponsored by Mission Blueprint. So when the Y2K, aka Millennium Bug, a computer program that could have wreaked worldwide disaster due to coding error was announced, many people began to store up on food and water. Now, some thought Jesus was returning. Maybe you did. But most people just went on with their lives as if nothing would happen, and nothing did. After the superficial smoke cleared and the computers were still running smoothly, probably Macs people, the sentiment of stocking up on supplies was most likely laughed at. And I know it was laughed at by the masses, as if their foreknowledge was foolproof. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we live in a consumer age. Everything became 24/7. Who needs to plan a meal when you can just eat out or just quick go to Walmart and get all of your needs? But now these past few years have taught us not to overlook the need for paper. You know, the kind you use in the bathroom. There are also rumors of our world getting worse. Some are saying the storm is coming, whatever that means. Now, on August 31st, 2020, then President Trump declared September National Preparedness Month. And September of 2022 is still that same month, being prepared. So I wanted to do a show on whether it's silly or not to stock up on food and water and whatever. So today we welcome Father Brian Eckrich, former Ron Colley Cavalier from the hub city of Aberdeen, where the Mog is still living and breathing. Hey, Father Brian, how you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing great. It's good to be here with you.
Hey, it is good to be. Tell the viewers just quickly a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Father Brian Eckrich. I have been a priest now of the Sioux Falls Diocese for about 5 years. Currently, I have a pretty diverse assignment. I'm the administrator for Garrettson and Huntimer, and also the chaplain for the state penitentiary.
So you write the checks in Garrettson?
Sure.
You sign the checks or you write the checks?
Well, I do everything. I'm the sort of the pastor.
Sort of the pastor. Okay.
Yep.
And you became a priest in what year?
It would have been June of 2017.
Oh, wow. That's a good year.
Yep.
2017. I like that. So listen, Father Brian and I had a recent conversation. And I was asking you, what is this preparedness stuff? And then I realized September is the month of being prepared. Actually, if you go to ready.gov, they have a whole thing on being prepared. And so I thought, you're a Catholic priest. You're very, very smart. Not as holy as me, but smart. I'm just teasing. What does it mean as Catholics, Christians, just people of goodwill? What does it mean to prepare? And why is that important in today's world?
Well, as you mentioned in the introduction, I think these last 2 years have taught us, kind of opened our hearts and minds to the reality of society. To say that, we've kind of fallen into this lull of thinking, well, we go to the store, something's going to be there. We order something on Amazon. It's going to be here in literally hours sometimes. And then I think it's like, okay, well, now we see this where we go into a store and maybe something we want or need is not there. Or you try to order something online and they say, well, it's going to be 6 months,
Vinegar.
Yeah.
We've been trying to buy vinegar. We can't find vinegar.
Well, and for my own parish, we just recently purchased a new nativity set, which I ordered probably 6 months ago. And it finally, just this week, they said we finally got it. So I think for us, it's like this kind of this reality that it is good to have the things you need for your family. And this isn't something that needs to be weird or like, obviously there's a kind of stigma of like, oh, you're a prepper or you're something like you're going to be burying shipping crates underground and you have 10 years worth of food. But no, it's something I think, and I've experienced this in conversations just in passing where I have friends from college, just people in the parish that maybe mention a comment to say, you know what? I saw some this, that, or the other thing on sale in the store, and I don't know that I need it right now, but I bought some of it just to have it because I got the space and they obviously it's coming out of a good place. These are husbands, fathers that say, oh, I'm the steward of my family and I need to protect them, provide for them, and this is a way to simply maybe store some stuff away. And it doesn't have to be crazy. It's just maybe a few extra days worth of food, whatever it is.
So I saw this video of this woman in Louisiana, and she was going through her house, showing us how she prepares because they have hurricanes, and she lived in New Orleans. And she was showing us, all the food that she has. And she said, you know what? It took me months to stock up. But when a hurricane comes, we're going to need all this food because we can't get back in for sometimes weeks.
Yeah.
So it's not a crazy thing. I think what's happened, I think two things have happened, and you can add in addition to this or disagree with me, but two things have happened. Y2K happened. People freaked out. And so the idea of being prepared like that was silly. But the other thing that's happened is we moved into such a consumer age where you go to Walmart for all your needs. And you know what? If you're going to have spaghetti tonight and you don't have spaghetti, you just quick go to Walmart and get it. It's not at home because, you're not really prepared. So I think those two things, and there might be other things that have happened where people think, well, why should I prepare? It's silly. But I do think the culture we live in, the time we live in, because of 24/7, people don't think they need to prepare. How long do you think, like for me, we have a garden and we're starting to can, and it's been fun learning how to can. And under the steps in my basement, under the steps is kind of a cool room. And so we're using that for some of our canning things. And this is a new thing for us. But it makes sense for me to prepare by canning. And this isn't like a novel idea. I mean, this goes way back, hundreds of years of people canning. So, but there are those people who say, and here's the problem that people run into. What about those who say, why not just trust God? I mean, that's a good question. Shouldn't we just put our trust that God will take care of us? Thoughts?
Well, absolutely. It's a both and where obviously we do trust God that he is ultimately in charge, and in the end, God wins. But we see it's part of Catholic theology that work out your salvation with fear and trembling, that God calls us to do work, that he gives us natural powers, that he expects us to have a role in that. And so I do think that there is both grace and nature, that grace is operative, but then our nature is called to do stuff too. And so this is where we say our prayers every day. We go to church, whatever it is on the spiritual level, but then, and especially as, the head of a household, you have to do certain things. You can't just sit here at like a bump on the log and say, well, I don't need to get a job, or I don't need to, I don't need to paint the fence or do the chores, whatever. God will take care of it. Well, no, it's not. Like, you have obligations. And so I think when you extend that to obviously just the ordinary care of your household, you have the obligation as a husband, a father, or even a mother and a wife to look out in the world and see, okay, what are the dangers? What's coming down the road here? To obviously not just prepare for the immediate needs of your family here today, but obviously prepare for tomorrow. Like, we all do this. You hopefully save for retirement. You save for your children's education. Okay, well, provide then for those more basic needs of your family, food, water, shelter, clothing, So I think that's where, why not just trust God? Well, you do, but he calls us then to do our part.
Yeah, he gave us an intellect. And I got to tell you, after the last 2 years, you better believe, ladies and gentlemen, almost every one of you have stocked up on toilet paper.
Yeah.
You're already preparing because you don't want to run out.
Well, and people do kind of say that as a joke, but I think everyone's serious. You remember that, where it's like, it's a necessity of life.
It's a necessity. You don't want to go to the bidets.
No. So
although I like that idea. Anyway, so I like what you're saying here. Let's get into, like, what does the Bible say specifically about, because we've been talking about, some people say, well, just trust God. Yeah, but I need to engage.
Yeah.
What is the Father's will, right? And so what does the Bible teach us about preparing?
Well, there's several instances. I think the first thing that comes to mind is Noah in the Old Testament. God says, I'm going to flood the world. And, well, Noah built this ark. And what's kind of interesting about that is that all these people around the world are probably watching him build the ark, and they're like, "You fool! Why do you don't need to do that until it starts to rain?" So that's one instance. We see Joseph, after his brother sold him into slavery, and then through God's providence, he worked his way up to win the favor of Pharaoh, and God said there's going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. So what does start stocking up food, fill up the grain bins. And then, of course, his brothers come in need, and then the tables turn, and he can actually provide for them. So there's that instance. We even think about when God calls the Israelites out into the desert, 40 years, the Exodus, that they had to bring things with them. Obviously, prepare the unleavened bread. Even as they depart from Egypt, the Egyptians, in kind of God's justice, give them gold and silver. I'm not sure how important that would be in the desert, but they brought it.
They did bring gold and silver. I mean, there was about...
Seems like kind of a heavy thing to haul around, but...
Well, yeah, and what do you do about... There were 1 million people, I think, in that group.
Yeah.
I think Caven said like 1.2 million or something.
Oh, yeah. But you think... Yeah, so, I mean, I just think, one, it's like, well, okay, God is going to call you out into the desert, but this is maybe one of those things, then, well, he calls you to make practical preparations, to do things, to bring stuff. You don't just go out into the desert. And I guess in many ways he does still provide for you through the manna, but there's a part you have to play in that. So then one of the things I think, and maybe we can, as far as the New Testament, the Gospel of Matthew 25, where Jesus talks about towards the end of time, whenever that is, there's going to be a trial and a tribulation. And I have right in front of me here, I could read this, the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, where then the kingdom of heaven shall be compared to 10 maidens who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil for them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. The bridegroom was delayed, and all slumbered and slept. But at midnight there was a cry, "Behold, the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all the maidservants rose and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil." And then, of course, then you think, well, the wise say, "No, we prepared and you didn't. You got to go off, and it's essentially too late for you."
Yeah, go back to the Noah's Ark scene. When it starts raining and Noah's in the ark. Imagine how many people started pounding on that ark in fear because they've done nothing.
Yeah.
And do you want to be one of those persons who, I just trust God, yada, yada, yada?
Yeah.
I was on a bus ride. I won't disclose who I was talking to when I was in Focus Ministries. But there's... actually, Michelle Dupont was talking to this gentleman. We both know Michelle real well. Mm-hmm. Knew Michelle. And she was talking about her health and getting healthier. And then she said to this gentleman, "So what do you do to take care of your health?" And he looked at her and smiled. "I just trust God and I eat whatever I want." And I thought, you're nuts. You're crazy. And then what's interesting is Michelle was trying to take care of herself, and we know what happened to her. So, yeah, it's not unreasonable to, the Bible clearly states we all should be prepared. So as a father of 5 kids, I've got a wonderful wife. What do you think preparing would look like for me? I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Well, I think first and foremost, and we kind of been maybe talking about, and I was continuing to think about even just like this parable. Obviously, there's both a physical element, but a spiritual element. That as a husband and father, you have a headship in the household, that you are the priest of the domestic church. And so I think first and foremost, we recognize that what's going on in our world is, I believe, a spiritual battle. It always has been, always will be. It's not the princes of the world, but it's powers and principalities. It's not flesh and blood. And so I think you have the obligation to pursue the virtue and sanctity, to be that example for your wife and for your children, to be that spiritual leader, to work to promote their sanctity. But then grace builds on nature. And so this is where I guess the part of, well, why is it important for you to prepare? Because the spiritual life is dependent on your physical flesh and blood that you need, that we're physical beings. And so I think for you, one, you be that example, that leader in virtue. But then obviously, as I said, as the head of a household, it is your obligation to provide the material needs. So I think like one of the things I hear that's becoming more popular, and you maybe already alluded to it, you do this is, maybe as a husband and father, you say, okay, I'm going to look into what's it take to start growing a garden. Where is it in my family that I can, we can learn skills. And this is a great thing maybe as a father, you can spend time with your children. Okay, let's learn how to do something today. Grow a garden, change the oil in your car. Trying to think of what else, go out target shooting. These practical skills that ultimately help lead you to being more self-sufficient. Maybe that's could be the thesis of this, is that obviously, you said we live in a consumerist age where we're just dependent on someone else. But now more and more, we realize that we can't rely on the world and society. Okay, maybe we have to turn back to maybe a former time. Where you think of for all centuries, our grandparents or great-grandparents, they learned how to do things themselves. And then that can actually be then, when you embrace that and start learning, that's, I guess, a cohesive factor in your family where it's like, okay, now it's a great thing for a father and a son to like, let's learn how to do something. Let's build something. I mean, think about that. You think about like the great memories of childhood is helping your father with a project to do something, whatever it is. And so I think this is where, as a husband and a father, I think you can really embrace that. It really is. It's something normal. It's not like, as I said, it's not something weird. It's just ultimately just living out the life of the family as it should be lived. So that's kind of my initial thoughts, I guess.
So I loved what you said about I am the priest of my home. Most men, I don't think about that. Most Catholic or Christian men, but they are the shepherds of their own flock. Mm-hmm. So, when it comes to the physical stuff, the material goods, of course, food, clothing, shelter. We all know there's a few things. Love is really important, I think, as well, right?
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of key. But so those are the material things. If you think about like me as the shepherd of my home, the typical man, dad, what would be the key spiritual things that you would recommend as I shepherd my kids?
I guess the first thing that comes to mind is praying the rosary. But I've encountered so many families where it's a beautiful thing, and I get invited into their home to spend a few nights or a few days, and at the end of the day, what do we do before everyone goes to bed? You pray the rosary. Maybe that means they're little kids, they're not necessarily paying attention, but they're still sitting there and they're listening.
Or wrestling with each other.
Sometimes prayer doesn't always have to be pious, and it can be. There is a healthy level of chaos that can be in the family, and God certainly works through that.
Yeah, it gets messy. The older my kids get, the easier it is, because we do pray the rosary.
Yeah.
So rosary, what would be the next thing?
I think also then just prayer with the scriptures. I remember like I kind of focus, and at the end of the day, that's when it seems like people kind of settle down, and you can actually maybe start doing some of these things. But you have story time with your kids. And I always thought maybe it's a good idea. Like, there's tons of stories simply just in the Bible. Can you read scripture with your children? So I think that's another thing you can do. So I guess prayer, the rosary, and scripture are the two things that come to mind. But then also maybe a third thing, obviously embracing, we don't do this very well in our world, the reality of fasting, of embracing willingly that suffering to take up your own cross. And I think this is something, especially on Fridays. Fridays during Lent, we say we're not supposed to eat meat, but in reality, every Friday is supposed to be a day of penance, of embracing something, whether it be, fasting from food, or to say, we're going to make some sacrifice. Maybe, a first Friday of the month, we're all going to go to confession. So everyone, kids, wife, pile in the vehicle. We're going to go to church. well, I don't think, well, maybe a kid's like, I don't think I need to go to confession. Well, you know what? We sin every day. We're going to show you, I'm going to teach you then maybe how to do an examination of conscience. And so it's going to be good. So I think to be a leader, to take the initiative in maybe more concrete things, like the routine of confession.
That's great stuff. So not every couple is the same. Not every family is the same. And different people have different needs. How do families discern how they are supposed to prepare for the physical items?
Yeah. I guess it thinks like, well, maybe most basically, where do you live? I mean, it's going to be different from someone that lives in the middle of Sioux Falls as someone lives in Volga, South Dakota, or maybe you live on a farm. Okay, well, that's going to look different. You have different resources available to you, and you have to essentially take that step back and say, okay, what is it that I have at my disposal? Maybe you have a big plot of land to grow a garden. Good. Well, that makes it easier. Maybe if you're in the middle of the city and you don't really have a big yard, okay, well, maybe it's going to look different. And I guess I hesitate to focus on like specifics because
Right.
I don't know what essentially that looks like, even for me as a priest, if I was going to try to, prepare things or set things aside, well, that looks different for me because I move every single year. I don't have a home that's my own. I live in a rectory.
Well, here's a quick story, ladies and gentlemen, if you are interested in discerning. And again, this isn't about precious metals, but this story is a friend of mine. His wife thought they should start buying precious metals. Okay. So she brought it up to him, and he said, "We're not doing that." And so what she decided to do is pray and say nothing to him. And if God wanted them to buy precious metals, it had to be his idea. It was, I don't know, weeks later, he said to her, "I think we should buy some precious metals." And she simply said, "Okay." And so they did. Now, I don't know how many precious metals, but you know what? It's not unreasonable. In the financial world, depending on who you listen to, some say you should have 3 months of wages stored up or 6 months stored up in your bank account just in case something happens. Mm-hmm. So it's not unreasonable to have 3 months of food, is it?
No. And you think about, I guess, in times past, I wasn't sure when I wanted to share this, but I still remember like my grandma and grandpa Steiner on my mom's side. They had 9 kids in their family, and they had not a great, not wealthy, there's a very modest living. Well, my grandma, she canned everything. You go in their basement and it's like, well, this is simply just enough to provide for the family for 1 year until next year when we can start growing the next garden. And so, yeah, it's like we do this in all things. And I guess maybe why it's actually much more quite normal than you'd expect. I mean, like you said, you have money in the bank account. Okay, well then also, how much money do you spend on insurance just in case something happens? You probably spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in your life for all sorts of insurances, insurance policy, this, that, and the other thing, just in the case that something might happen. And so this is really just kind of, you might view this in terms of sort of an insurance policy, to say the most basic kind, to say, okay, I'm providing for my most basic needs.
Well, here's a quote that someone shared with me last night. If you have the ability to do something, then you have the moral obligation as well. So it's one of these things where, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that aren't preparing, I think you already do.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about is maybe having a little more food than you would have normally. We started canning a few years ago. I didn't know how to can. My wife didn't know how to can. We started growing tomatoes. And so when we, of course, you know what I'm going to say, when we eat our tomatoes and you compare them to the stores, it's night and day. Mm-hmm. My brother Gary makes the best pickles in the world. Well, he's from Aberdeen like you are.
Oh, yes. Well, then
Then you,
Of course they're great.
Yeah, but then you compare them to the store. It's like, wow. And in a little bit, you and I are going to eat homemade bread. And ladies and gentlemen, you can already smell it through the microphones. So when you teach some of these simple things like making bread, and sometimes my wife will take wheat and she'll blend it up and so she'll use that flour to make bread. It's unbelievable. Mm-hmm. But we've been so desensitized to how we could be living. Consider canning. We love it. My wife's pickles are wonderful. The tomatoes are wonderful, but it's not unreasonable to have food for 3 months, 6 months.
And I guess maybe along those lines of thought, the most practical question is, how do you start doing this? And like I said, sometimes people think, well, they freak out and you think, well, I gotta dump a huge amount of money and get online and buy, a pallet of MREs. It's like, well, go to the grocery store and buy the normal things that you eat. And then maybe buy just one extra thing. Maybe you're going to go get, 3 cans of soup, a jar of peanut butter. Okay, we'll buy 2 jars of peanut butter. And it's like, then just set that aside. And it doesn't have to be something big. It's not even something really noticeable. And then if you do that, maybe buy a few extra things every single week. Pretty quick, after a few months, a year, you're going to see it. So that's as simply as it needs to be. Even if maybe you don't have obviously I'm a proponent of canning, but I admit I myself don't know how to can, and I probably should know how. But yeah, for me, it's like, okay, well, you go to the store, buy an extra something, whatever it is. And it's something that you'll use if it's not going to go bad. And a lot of times these things that we can buy will actually last quite a bit longer. And then you just rotate through them. You have to have, that's another thing. You have to have an order about doing stuff. You don't just pack stuff away and then forget about it, because eventually it will go bad. You can say, okay, your rotation in your pantry, okay, I buy this, and then you use the oldest stuff first, and then the newest stuff that you just bought, you put towards the back, and you can just cycle through it. So it's really something as simple as that. And, it doesn't need to be complicated. I know maybe one thing to caution against, I guess I admit sometimes in my free time, I can go down the rabbit holes on the internet, like, almost a kind of a vain amusement, watching these, all these prepper channels, and you got to have this, that, they make it look fancy and like it's got to be something complicated. It's not.
Keep it simple. Apply the KISS acronym.
Yep.
Keep it simple.
I was going to say just one thing that came to mind, and we haven't really talked about this yet, is you said, okay, well, we've been talking about food, but yeah, water. And you think about, where was it recently was it Memphis? Or no, where was that their whole water system just went down?
Yeah, well, Michigan has
Michigan, yeah. So, you think about water is the most important thing. And we see now a handful of instances where maybe a municipal water thing, they just say, sorry, the water that comes out of your tap is no good. And so I think it's like, well, what can we do? And obviously we kind of joke about, we didn't joke. Well, you and I own a Berkey. Okay, well, that's kind of expensive. But I know one of the things that I am knowledgeable on, because I do a lot of camping and backpacking, and it's like, well, there are a lot of just very simple, like water filtration, like the Sawyer mini filter is this little tiny thing. Should have brought one in, actually.
Yeah.
But, where it's $25 and it's good to filter out. It's good for like 100,000 gallons of water. And so you think about, you could just attach that onto maybe like a 5-gallon pail, and you can have a drip water filter, kind of a cheap version of a Berkey. But it's something simple as that, to ask yourself, most basic thing, how might I be able to even prepare drinkable water? Filter it.
You get the final word. Anything that, what is your takeaway? Anything you want to talk about?
Yeah. I just encourage it. Obviously, as you mentioned, that example with the wife, who wants to buy precious metals and offering it up to prayer, that ultimately this is a spiritual battle. We can often think it's just something political. It's just something like, no, what is going on in our world Jesus Christ promised. He said that there would be trials and tribulation. I don't know. I'm not going to say like, oh, this is the end times. Repent, the end is near. But more and more we see what's happening in our world, that things are evil, that there is a growing evil in the world. And more people, just normal people who you'd never even think would be saying these things, are saying, I need to prepare to protect my home, my family. That this is something that people are doing. And it's a physical thing, but then it's a spiritual thing. So maybe what was I getting at initially, like that as a husband and father, as a wife and a mother, obviously don't forget the spiritual element. Pray, offer this up, and really invite our Lord into this. Ask him and maybe you talked about discerning what specifically for your family. Ask Jesus, what do you want me to do for my family? And he might actually say, you know what, maybe I want you to trust in me a little bit more. You're putting too much of your pride in thinking that I have to prepare everything for myself. So, and it's a both end. Maybe he said, you know what, obviously your trust in me is good, but I want you to step up and I want you to do this. Maybe I want you to buy some precious metals. Who knows? Maybe I want you to go buy a firearm and learn how to use it. Go target shooting. I don't know. But I say that's the beautiful thing, is like, I don't have to know, and I don't have to sit here and tell you, like, here's the checklist of all the stuff that you need to do or have. And even for myself, I don't know. I'm just along for the ride. And, I invite the Lord into that, and I say, how do you want to guide me? What is it that I should be doing today in my spiritual life to build up the spiritual well-being of my family, but also the material, physical needs?
Well, there it is.
There we go.
Father Brian Eckrich. So good to have you here. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next week. May God strengthen the bars of your gates. Hey, thanks for listening to the Glen Gauer podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Rumble, and YouTube. May God strengthen the bars of your gates.